I was curious. It seems that most of my bad decisions began with curiosity. And if I'm completely honest, most of my good ones do too. So I knew I had a 50-50 shot the moment the word yes fell uncontrollably from my lips that day in Paris. Romeo, yes, that was his name, had been piercing through my insecure American soul with his green and mischievous French-Cuban eyes. To be fair, it wasn't hard to be insecure in Paris at 28 when you have a minimal grasp of the language and a maximum disappointment for everything else. Well, that's not true. That's not entirely true. I did minor in French, so I had somewhat of a grasp. But there's quite a disparity between French in Pennsylvania and French in Paris. In that moment, I also felt the disparity between the coolness of Romeo's stare and that hot, humid August day in Paris. When my eyes finally met his commanding gaze, I knew that the answer to whatever question his parting full lips had for me would be affirmative. You see, in my late 20s, I'd saved enough money to live in Paris for 6 months. I wanted so much to experience my romanticized teenage dream of living in the city of lights, eating croque monsieurs, savoring champagne, wearing a raspberry beret, and falling deeply madly with a Frenchie. Of course, all of this needed to happen before I turned 30. You see, in your teens, or at least in mine, hitting 30 means a 401k plan and a walker at best, cats and an old shoe at worst. I had created a fantasy with an expiration date. Oh, how calamitous, how French of me. Even though I was closer to 30 than 15 when I was living in Paris, and aware that growing older was not a death sentence, I still wanted to, or should I say, I needed to experience that passion, that love, that unbridled sex that Paris silently promises all of her tourists. During my first months, I'd been roaming alone in this tragic and magical city. I'd stroll down the narrow street of Hemingway's Hood. Glancing up towards his flat, I'd wonder what he and Hadley must have seen back in the day. I'd glamorize the alcohol-infused brawls between Matisse and Picasso in the Bateau Lavoir while I explored the bohemian lifestyle of the Montparnasse, of the Montmartre, excuse me. I'd imagine Coco Chanel sitting on the 5th step of the winding staircase of her famed fashion house in the luxurious Place Vendôme. I even visited the intestine of the Leviathan twice to understand the fascination that Victor Hugo had with Paris's sewers. I never did. For me, the only lascivious liaison I'd had been lunching with the famous at the infamous Père Lachaise Cemetery. I was drawn to dining with the likes of Gertrude Stein, Edith Piaf, Frédéric Chopin, and of course Jim Morrison. In retrospect, I'm not sure which won the morbid title, the fact that all my Parisian friends were dead, or that I preferred picnicking at a cemetery instead of sipping at a cafe. However, it was there amidst these headstones and stone Jim Morrison sojourners that I had my chance encounter with Romeo and an unforgettable night. Vous lisez et mangez avec les morts? You read and eat among the dead? I responded, trying to inhale part of my word in that flippant way I'd heard the Parisians do. Ah, you're American, he said in his alluring accent that bordered on condescension. Really? From my oui? I was no longer interested in impressing my suitor. I was wounded. No, he smiled. It is from your beaten copy of Moveable Feast. And he paused before adding, and your baseball hat. He laughed, so did I. How American of me. I like it here too, Père Lachaise. It has magic that people do not understand, but you do, American, with a baseball hat. He grinned and then, unprompted with conviction, leaned in to give me 2 lingering kisses, sensually caressing each cheek. I like that you see beauty in this place. There is so much beauty in Paris, in places one cannot expect. Yes, I thought, I had experienced the unexpected beauty of Paris. And now I felt that I was about to experience the beauty of the unexpected in Paris. We both paused to admire as dusk began to roll into the sky. It will soon be night. Can I show you my Paris? Ah, pardonnez-moi. My name is Romeo, et vous? Me? I answered timidly as I instinctively bit my bottom lip before continuing. My name is Liza. We quickly gathered our belongings and dashed to his motorcycle, racing to catch the last glimpses of the setting sun. Yes, Romeo had a motorcycle. I had fallen for him the moment his lips touched my cheeks, but as my legs straddled the back of his Kawasaki, I began to plan my free-spirited French wedding. This fantasy was taking flight. My arms outstretched around his chiseled torso, hands placed methodically on his chest and his abdomen, clutching his physique any time we turned or hit a bump on the road. I needed this ride to last. He would later inform me that he played bongos for fun, and I'd wondered if that was the secret to those washboard abs. On that bike, I kept my eyes open as he navigated us through the twisted streets of the city. I wanted to experience roaring through the city of lights, but all I could fixate on his smell, the bouquet of his sculpted body. Our first stop was an undisclosed rooftop in the first arrondissement. I knew we were in the center because in between the whiffs and the inhales of his upper back, I noticed that we'd passed the obelisk and had been cruising beside the Jardin Luxembourg. He stopped in front of a typical 15th century building adorned with atypical graffiti, the kind that tacitly says, "Beware." "I know this building," I exclaimed. I had passed this hedonistic den many times, yearning to enter, but never having the nerve. "Don't worry, it is not dangerous." I wasn't worried, I was excited. This was the infamous After Squat, an abandoned bank building that had been taken over by squatting artists refusing to let this beautiful structure in a desirable area continue unnoticed. It was a mecca for partying in the evenings. It looked ominous, but felt exhilarating. Up we went, up a winding, rickety staircase, passing painted rooms and partying nonconformists. All I felt was a tight grip of his hand, directing me to our destination, a rooftop view of our setting sun. On the rooftop, we talked more about our passions than our pasts, allowing our energies to entwine more than our words. As the moon became more prevalent, we kissed. It was a sweet and passionate and perfect kiss. It was a soft kiss that lasted long enough to keep me hooked and short enough to keep me wanting. We must now have some tapas and drinks to continue the night. The emphasis was certainly on the drinks, at least for me. Back on the bike towards the Marais in the fourth quarter was Bar Les Étages, famous for its sangria, or at least that's what the chalkboard said. The place was filled with gorgeous and young people speaking French, Spanish, Italian, and English. I was intoxicated with the vibe. People swayed to the live beat of a gypsy jazz trio. Bodies glistened from the sweat of instruments being feverishly played or from dancing. The bar was alive. I felt a sudden high, not from the alcohol, but from the night. It hit me. Paris had finally let me in. She allowed me to experience the vibrancy of what she has to offer, the night of unrestrained entertainment, the electrifying energy that I had been hungering for. "You dance with your hips," he proclaimed, "so we must dance." Off we went, on his motorcycle, jetting over the Seine to a small underground bar off the Champs-Élysées, closer to the Louvre than the Arc de Triomphe. We had to follow the lead of our bodies and dance, and salsa was our dance. So the Cuban Frenchman with the washboard abs and the Mexican American with the long, dark, cascading hair took over the small and crowded dance floor, where for us, no one else existed. Entangled dance after dance. Our feet were in rhythmic precision. Our arms pressed and pulled against each other, our hands holding and then releasing, our bodies in perfect unison, inseparable. Our lips eventually finding each other again and again and again. What I never told Romeo is that I had been to the cemetery to say goodbye to Paris. I had decided to cut my trip short and come home. That month of trying desperately to meet anyone had been fruitless until that night. It was 3 in the morning when we finally exited the cavernous Dynamite Dancing Club. I hadn't realized until the hours of dancing had passed how grateful I was that I was actually wearing sensible shoes. We must We have one more place to stop. It is a must. Sleepless, Paris was still buzzing as we made our way through the winding streets of Montmartre to reach the Sacré-Cœur. We sat on the white steps of the imposing basilica and shared a bottle of Beaujolais that he had picked up on the way. We said little as we soaked in much. Romeo allowed me to absorb the beauty of Paris in quiet solitude. He watched as I fell moonstruck with a city that had finally opened her soul to me. I felt at peace. I felt at home. All this thanks to an accidental encounter with an exotic bongo dancer who would remain in my life for years as a lover, a teacher, a betrayer, and finally a friend.